Howdy, folks. I haven't done a video intro. I don't think I've ever done a video intro like this, but I'm really excited about today's episode. And also, I want to let you know this episode is being published on October 8th of 2025. And next week, on October 13, 14, and 15, I'll be attending the Advanced Lateral Flow Conference in La Jolla, where I'll be moderating a panel on the 15th. And I'm telling you this now because you can save 25% on your registration, if that's of interest to you, when you use the code LSMR25. And I'll put a link to the event in the show notes for this episode. All right, let's get on with it.
Welcome to Life Science Marketing Radio, the podcast where marketing leaders inside and outside the sciences share their creative ideas and practical approaches to increasing your marketing ROI. Here's your host, Chris Connor.
All right, my guest today is Julian Willard. He is a board advisor and strategist for biopharma leaders. And today we're going to talk about storytelling from a little bit of a different angle. And in this case, I want to say that it's storytelling versus math. Does that sound like a reasonable description?
Very reasonable description.
Yeah, so Julian, welcome to Life Science Marketing Radio.
Well, thank you for having me today.
I've been looking forward to this one. So let's start out. So you wrote a post talking about valuations for small molecule platforms versus, biologics. And so you thought that maybe small molecules get overlooked despite the potential advantages in cost or scalability. Why do you think that is?
This is one of the perverse ironies in biotech today. So let me give you the hard numbers first because they tell really a remarkable story. Recent FDA data shows that from 2009 to 2023, small molecules actually represented 73% of all new drug approvals. So it's slightly over 400 new therapeutics. But the stunning thing about this is when you look at the development cost, the median development cost for small molecules is about $2.1 billion versus $3 billion for biologics. So that's a 30% cost advantage right there. But the interesting thing here is that small molecules don't take longer to develop. A lot of times people think that it takes small molecules, when people compare small molecules and biologics, right? People often say that there is a difference in the development time. If you look at the numbers, the median development time is actually about 12.7 years for small molecules versus 12.5 or 12.6 years for biologics. So statistically, these numbers are almost identical. So this narrative that biologics are somehow more innovative or complex from a development timeline perspective, it's just not supported by the data from the timeline perspective. And now let's talk about the manufacturing and patient access. Small molecule manufacturing scales beautifully. Every time you double production volume, unit costs drop by approximately 30%. With biologics, you're dealing with living cell systems that require $1 million bioreactors, specialized cold chain logistics, and facility costs that can run into hundreds of millions of dollars. And so that was the manufacturing piece. When you look at the patient access story, it's actually even more stark. The median annual treatment cost, it's about $92,000 for biologics, and it's $33,000 for small molecules. So when we talk about health equity and global access, we're essentially saying that biologics are for upper income countries and more well-off patients. So your question that you just asked, so why do small molecules get overlooked? It comes down to three fundamental market distortions that I have been tracking for the past few years, and I wrote about this in my LinkedIn post. One is the regulatory framework actively penalizes small molecules. Under the Inflation Reduction Act, biologics get 13 years of market exclusivity before price negotiation. Small molecules get 9. So that's the pill penalty that everybody is talking about. And it's already causing 6 out of 7 biotech investors to pivot away from small molecule development. The second thing is we have what I call the narrative premium. And I work with a lot of biotech senior executives and CEOs. When they walk into the investor presentation rooms, they're not selling molecules, they're selling stories. So when they share a story, it's, we're using engineered T cells to turn the patient's immune system into a cancer-fighting machine. It sounds so much more sexy than we designed a small molecule that inhibits a kinase pathway, right?
Yeah.
So that's the storytelling piece. And the third distortion, the market distortion, is in our investment models themselves. So risk-adjusted net present value calculations are highly sensitive to peak sales assumptions and market exclusivity periods. So when you're looking at a 2.5 or 3-fold difference in projected NPV, many investors just shrug and say, oh, that's within the margin of error. But that noise represents real patients who won't get access to affordable treatments. So what we're getting as a result is we're systemically biasing innovation toward more expensive, harder to manufacture therapies. And don't get me wrong, we need them. And I'm a big proponent of biologics and especially biosimilars. But we're biasing innovation systemically toward more expensive, harder to manufacture therapies that serve smaller patient populations. So, and it's opposite of what good public health policy should encourage.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to I always have to go backwards through my list. So right there, it's just you might say that that's an allocation of resources challenge. Like we're putting investors in general, right, putting too much money towards things that go to a small population, and there's large opportunity elsewhere. I want to go back to the beginning when you compared the median time and cost of developing small molecules versus biologics, and ask about the average, because usually I'm a fan of the median, but I'm saying well, tell me about the average time for those. Does it matter?
It doesn't matter.
Okay.
Well, we focus on median because there are a lot of outliers.
Outliers, yeah.
Yes, in the drug development costs, so we prefer the median because it depends on the biologic, the target, the biology target. It becomes the question of the therapeutic area that we're talking about and such. So the median is a preferred calculation.
Right, because a few strong outliers skew the average.
Exactly.
So, okay, the median makes sense. All right. So then we're talking about storytelling, as you say. So I'm a big advocate on this podcast of storytelling for marketing and life sciences. But you make the point that yes, in terms of this, it is a market distortion when you say, we're training we're using T cells to make the patient's immune system attack cancer, as opposed to we've got a pill, which, we've been taking for decades as a therapy for everything you can imagine, from a headache to something else, right?
Yes.
And it's just not as sexy. So can the narrative be structured in a way that better aligns with financial logic, or do we just have to live with this distortion?
Well, this gets to something really fundamental about how human brain and human cognition works versus how we think decision making should work in a rational market and in a rational environment. So I've been in those investor conversations, what I call a Shark Tank for PhDs. You walk in with them, mouse models showing complete tumor regression, detailed pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamic data, competitive landscape analysis. People have, Monte Carlo simulations for market scenarios ready for discussion with investors. It's all data driven, all very rigorous. But what actually moves the room, it's when you pull up the slide with that 8-year-old kid who was in a hospice with metastatic brain cancer and their tumor completely disappeared on this investigational therapy. So suddenly the room gets quiet, everybody is focused, and this is the moment where you see actually the investors lean forward. But now there is nothing wrong with that emotional response. It is actually very appropriate, and I do believe that we should share a patient story because patients comes first. But drug development is about helping patients. The problem is when a narrative becomes a substitute for rigor rather than the complementary part to it. And in biotech, we have this cognitive bias where every company believes they are a statistical outlier. You will not believe how many CEOs of biotech, smaller biotech that I work with, they will tell you, in conversation, I will tell them, historical data showing that 60% of phase 1 drugs fail. And they will say, well, we're not developing a historical drug. We're unique, right? So you will tell them, okay, well, but the industry-wide success rates for your therapeutic area, what do you think about that? And they would say, well, we have a very differentiated approach. So there is some element of narcissism to certain biotech CEO behaviors that should be recognized. So this is where storytelling becomes dangerous because every biotech pitch deck usually starts with, unlike other biotechs, we ... And frankly, many investors want to believe in the outlier story because that's where the 100x returns come from, right?
Right.
But here's what's really happening. We've created an industry where the best storytellers get funded, not necessarily the best science. It's like, I live in Los Angeles, right? Here in Los Angeles, you need a great pitch, you need a compelling narrative arc, and characters that audience can cheer for. And that makes your story investable. So the venture capital method that many firms use actually institutionalizes this bias. Instead of building detailed financial models, they apply a simple multiple to peak sales estimates. It's faster, it's less analytically demanding, but it fundamentally favors assets that can tell a big story about massive market potential. The most sophisticated investors that I know and that I worked with started requiring what I call narrative accountability. They want compelling patient story, but they also want to see how the story translates into realistic market assumptions, competitive positioning, risk-adjusted returns. And in fact, I will tell you that most of my recent work was actually to help biotech executives before they go into these investor rooms I don't want to use the word to dumb down, but to dumb down the science story a little bit and match it with combine the compelling patient story with a compelling financial and science story.
Okay, going backwards again. So I like that approach, not that I'm an expert or even close, but just to say that, like, we are matching this narrative with our numbers. Like, we can make these things line up, and this is a thing you should be looking for. And so you're helping investors, and then going back to the beginning, the narcissism that's a part of the process naturally, because it takes a little bit, I would say. I mean, I look at leaders all the time and I think, well, why is that person the way they are? And I think, well, That seems to be a component of some degree of success, often. And so it sort of reinforces itself that way. And I don't know the answer to how to dial that back and maintain the drive to do all the things you're doing. But naturally, that's how they're going to tell their stories, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
So we're talking about, now we're getting into the numbers. So would the industry be better off if we treated drug development like an investment portfolio and less like a storytelling competition? So I guess what that would mean in my head is, investors say, have a collection of assets that they're going to look at in different ways to fill some sort of a niche in their portfolio. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, so I actually would say that this is starting to happen, and it's the space that's fascinating to watch. We're seeing the emergence of what we call portfolio biotech, companies that are fundamentally rethinking how to organize around scientific risk. Bridge Bio is probably the best example in this space. They were founded explicitly on modern portfolio theory principles. For listeners, if you're interested in learning about modern portfolio theory principles, it's the same mathematics that Harry Markowitz won the Nobel Prize for in finance. But instead of betting everything on one hero compound, these companies, they fund multiple shots on goal within related therapeutic areas. So the math is actually pretty elegant. If you have 10 programs with 20% success rate each, your probability of at least one success is getting closer to 90%. So if you have one program with a 20% success rate, you're rolling the dice on a single outcome, right? So it is better to spread your risk. But implementing this approach requires completely different incentive structures. Right now, a biotech CEO gets rewarded for having the highest single asset valuation at their Series A. They optimize for the story that gets the biggest headline in Fierce Biotech or on your radio show. So, and in a portfolio model, they would get rewarded for the highest success rate across multiple programs. So it's like the difference between hitting home runs and getting on the base, right? Both have value, but they require different approaches and different metrics. But the challenge is that our entire ecosystem, from venture capital to public markets to regulatory pathways, is built around the blockbuster model. Every drug has to be $1 billion winner. But what if we funded $50 million successes instead, right? McKinsey did some interesting analysis showing that pharmaceutical companies with more diverse portfolios actually have more stable returns and lower beta. So it's not as exciting as betting everything on the next Keytruda, but it's more sustainable and probably leads to more patients getting actually treated, right? But so when I work with investors, I always say that the incentives would have to change at multiple levels for this model to work. Investors would need longer horizons and different performance metrics. Management would need to excel at resource allocation across multiple programs rather than just advancing one lead asset. And frankly, we would need different kinds of leaders, people who can manage scientific risk systematically rather than just craft compelling single asset narratives. And I know that I have a few big headhunting firms that I spoke to recently that are looking for a couple leaders currently for their biotech firms, and they want a person who can think bigger than just one single asset.
I like the picture you're painting here of, for a single company, for a startup, I'm presuming there's typically one asset, right? So then
Yes.
it goes, if you were a pharma company and you had multiple assets, you would think about all your drug development programs as a portfolio. And you could also do that as an investor, but I'm guessing a lot of investors specialize in therapeutic areas or have experts in each of those areas. And then how you need someone to bring them all together across those to mitigate the risks
Yes.
between different things. And so it's a different kind of person that we ought to be training, it seems.
Most definitely. It's a different kind of person, it's a different kind of leader. But also, when you mentioned that we're bringing in investors, the portfolio approach is when you spread the risk across the same therapeutic area, right?
Okay.
We want an investor who is going to invest in the same therapeutic area, but instead of focusing on one approach, let's spread our risk across 15 to 20 programs
Right.
within the therapeutic area. Yeah.
And it's an attractive idea if you say we've got 10 shots on goal that are 20% likely to get up to 90%, which would be very appealing as opposed to, well, I guess, I don't know how the money works out otherwise, but when you're going to say any one drug is 90% likely to fail.
Yes.
I also like the general attitude. I appreciate long-term thinking where everybody does well. So I'm going to get a little political and just ask, I don't think the United States has the mindset of not being a blockbuster. We're all about the single hero. Is that fair? It just seems like we don't have the culture to do that. I wish we did, but
I think you are very spot on. Coming from a person who came from Europe, it was one of the culture shocks for me. Well, I came to the United States as a diplomat in Washington, D.C., and the mentality in Europe is more about us together, right? It's us against the world. And in the States, it is the mentality, it's not only on a personal level, but also at a corporate level. It's me, me, me.
Yeah.
Right. And I have to be the number one. Yeah.
Right. And we love winners, but we don't think about, as a country or an industry or any way you want to slice it, how can we all do better? And because there are costs. And I think we pay those costs regardless. And we complain about them, but we're doing the very things that make that happen. Okay, enough of that rant. I'm going to switch gears because I love antibiotics. So you described antibiotics, for example, as a national security issue. How can public-private models like DARPA change the game for developing new antibiotics, which is going to be on the horizon as a very important thing, I believe?
Well, this is a great segue from that discussion around, let's think about our collective well-being, right? So antibiotics are a perfect case study of market failure made a national security imperative. So let me walk you through the economics, because the economics of antibiotics are actually brutal. And I worked on this issue when I was in the diplomatic service through the World Bank. From a traditional pharmaceutical perspective, developing antibiotics makes no business sense whatsoever. And everybody is going to be shocked by this statement. But it is true. Unlike cancer drugs, where patients take them continuously for months or years, we use antibiotics only for a few days.
Right.
So if you're going to develop a breakthrough antibiotics, doctors will actually use it very sparingly to prevent resistance. The better your drug, the less it gets used, right?
Yeah.
So when it comes to pricing, the pricing is impossible too. Try explaining to an insurance company that your new antibiotic costs $50,000 when there is a generic amoxicillin that you can procure for $50. So even if your drug saves lives that amoxicillin can't, the healthcare system in the United States is built around cost containment. But from a national security perspective, when I think about antibiotic resistance, it's an existential threat. CDC recently mentioned their estimates that we could return to a pre-penicillin world where routine surgeries become life-threatening if we continue to abuse the use of antibiotics and disregard the need for investment into the new ones, right? So this is where the DARPA and BARDA that you mentioned, their approach is brilliant. They've essentially decoupled development incentives from market incentives. BARDA's recent RFP commits to purchasing antibiotic stockpiles regardless of whether they ever get used. So it's like buying insurance. You hope you never need it, but you have to pay the premium. That's where the BARDA and the government step in. The second thing, and I urge the listeners to Google this, there is a CARB-X program that's combating antibiotic-resistant bacteria biopharmaceutical accelerator. A very interesting program. So they committed over $800 million to early stage antibiotic development. So they're funding academic labs, they are funding small early stage biotech, they even have big pharma partnerships with shared risk models. So the model works because it changes the risk reward equation at every level. The government absorbs the market risks through guaranteed purchase commitments, and industry provides the innovation expertise and manufacturing capability. And academic research, of course, contributes with the basic fundamental biological research, right? So what's really smart is that they're not just funding individual projects, they're funding platforms. Again, back to our portfolio and platform approach. So if you develop a novel approach to disrupting, let's say, bacterial cell walls, that platform that you develop might work against multiple resistant pathogens. That's why the platform approach investment makes sense. So I do think that this could be a template for other areas where market incentives don't align with societal needs. Some of these areas are pandemic preparedness. Another one is rare disease research, even mental health. Anywhere where the patient population is too small or too sick to generate the traditional pharmaceutical returns. The question is, do we have the political will to expand this beyond model, to expand this model beyond defense applications into broader public health challenges? And I don't know the answer to this.
Right. But it seems like, given your list there, like antibiotics, the hard sell is convincing the government that this is a serious risk and is worth putting money to buy the insurance. That's essentially what they're doing. And it seems like the antibiotic platform would be a good test case that could trickle on to all those other things you mentioned. What do you think about that? Is that?
I think that's a fair way to say. I think that with antibiotic resistance, it is, it's not something that we talk about on TV. You will not hear about this on CNN, but it is something that privately in the government channels, it is a very big concern, right? Antibiotic resistance is a significant problem,
right,
or can become a significant problem. I would say that mental health is just as significant, but I think in the minds of the government officials, the antibiotic resistance can be the real apocalypse that we see on TV.
Right, because of communicability, in a sense, right?
Exactly.
I mean, that would be one component of it. It's tangible. We've all taken an antibiotic. Few of us have seen what happens when an antibiotic doesn't work, but if it's good to know that people are aware of that.
Yes.
Yeah, not to diminish the need for mental health as well, but it's just something easier for everybody to wrap their head around. I mean, I just saw in the news, whooping cough is on its way back. Like,
not to get political.
Right, exactly.
And we will not.
Well, I'll just say this. My mother had 2 siblings die of whooping cough. It's not that long ago. So,
Yes.
Anyway, last question. So, decision making. and the possibility that AI could reduce some of that bias and noise in the things we were talking about earlier in the program about, are we focusing on the story or are we focusing on the math? So what's the biggest opportunity do you see to use AI, and what are we still getting wrong about how we're using them?
We could not avoid talking about AI, right?
Of course.
Well, so I work as an advisor with many investors and senior executives. So the biggest opportunity isn't replacing human judgment. It is making human judgment more systematic and less prone to the cognitive biases that plague early stage investing, in my opinion. Right now, biotech investing is embarrassingly primitive from an analytical standpoint. We often make billion-dollar bets based on 30-page decks and 2-hour presentations. So we rely on historical analogies. This looks like Keytruda, so it should work like Keytruda, right? Even though every drug is fundamentally unique. So with artificial intelligence, which can process vastly more information simultaneously, we can take a different route. Instead of comparing your drug to one of two historical precedents, using machine learning techniques that can analyze thousands of molecular features, patient population characteristics, competitive dynamics, even changing regulatory pathways in different regions, we can take a different approach. But here's what we're getting wrong. We're using AI to optimize the current system. That is one of my pet peeves, and I'm participating in a conference later today in San Diego where we talk about the use of AI to develop for new innovations and new investments into innovation. Everybody is using AI to optimize the current system rather than completely explode the system and reimagine it, right? We're teaching machines to pick better molecules for traditional clinical trials instead of asking ourselves whether we need those traditional trials at all. Can we completely rethink the clinical development process? So DARPA that we talked about, they have this ANSR program, I believe. It's Assured Neural and Symbolic Reasoning program. So what they're trying to solve is they're trying to solve the black box problem. Current systems can tell you what decision to make, but they can't tell you why, right? And in drug development, understanding the why becomes crucial for regulatory approval. And later, when you have to communicate that story to physicians, that why becomes critical, right? So the real breakthrough will come when AI helps us design adaptive clinical trials that learn and adjust in real time. So instead of enrolling 300 patients in a rigid protocol that we currently do, right? You start with 50 patients and you use machine learning techniques to optimize the dosing, patient selection, potentially the endpoint measurements as you continue to gather data. But there is always, so this is a good side, right? But there's also a darker side. As you know, everybody talks about this, that artificial intelligence systems, they inherit the biases in their training data. So if we train them on historical biotech investments that we just discussed, they will perpetuate the same biases toward narrative over substance, right? So the most promising applications that I have seen so far in a few investment communities focus on what I call the bias detection and correction. So instead of using AI to make investment decisions, you can actually use machine learning to identify when human decision makers are relying too heavily on irrelevant factors. And those irrelevant factors can be, one example is, we want to invest into a company with charismatic management teams, or this is the most exciting disease area that we want to invest into, right? So these are the very much human, heavy, biased things that can distort the investment potentially.
Yeah. You locked up for a second, but looks like you're back now.
Yes.
So what? Yeah, I'm thinking. I love the idea of taking out the bias, making more reasonable decisions. What I was going to say was, this is the question I'm always asking, and again, not an expert at all, but wondering what are the components of 90% of drugs failing in clinical trials that have nothing to do with the molecule or the target and everything about the process around them. I don't know if that's a thing, but it just seems to me like AI might be able to tell us what we're doing wrong to get some of those things through that might not otherwise and didn't make it.
You're absolutely right. So there are many contributing factors to those failures.
Yeah.
And if we use machine learning in the right way, we can reduce that percentage from 90% to a lower percentage. Yes. But I would urge, if executives are listening to this podcast, if you're thinking of investing into an AI program, focus on 2-3 top line revenue generating opportunities within your companies that really transform your business versus let's just fix a couple processes that we have in our business. That would be probably a waste of money.
Okay, fair enough. I was just thinking about clinical trials, how we do them, but I get what you're saying. I don't have anything else. Julian, this has been awesome. I learned a ton today, and it's just a fun thing to think about. Clearly, you think about it a lot, and definitely worth hearing your opinion for sure.
Incredible. Thank you for inviting me.
My pleasure. Hey, if you're still listening, that tells me you enjoyed the podcast. But don't tell me, tell your friends, and I'll be back soon with another episode. Okay, you can tell me too. Send an email, chris@lifesciencemarketingradio.com. Bye-bye.